Aimee Bock, the ringleader behind the $250 million Minnesota fraud scheme tied to the nonprofit organization Feeding Our Future, reveals during a jailhouse interview that she struggles to believe that Ilhan Omar wouldn't have known about it. Omar's name appeared at least 6 times in this fraud case, according to federal court documents. Okay, this story, I think it was the New York Post that had it. I am like kind of just, I wish Jason was here because he always brings this woman up. But the stuff she said was so alarming, Daniel. First of all, she had 6 email exchanges with Omar, okay? She mentions that in, I think, one of her quotes, she says that there's like 80 to 90 people that have been charged. She's the only white one. She also noted that in a 2021... Way to play the race card, right? Well, in a 2021, and she's facing like 100 years. This is pretty serious. In a 2021 email, she flagged fraud, some restaurant that was allegedly, Terry will like this, 21,000 meals a day, was making 21,000 meals a day. She flagged it, and she was told, I guess, in response that they don't handle fraud.
Sounds like a Jose and Trace, you know, when he's feeding kids abroad during war, they crank out those meals.
But if you're flagging fraud and then you end up being, you know, charged in this fraud scheme, isn't that part of the problem? Wouldn't that be part of her defense? Like showing the emails where she's been alerting some people to like, how is a restaurant making 21,000 meals a day?
Yeah, just because you're like alerting fraud doesn't mean that you may not be, that you're not also part of the fraud. And so, you know, that might have been cover that she was doing. But I think that this is very troubling for Ilhan Omar about just trying to address this issue. She hasn't, you know, she doesn't want to testify about this. And so a lot of people think that, you know, she's being pretty evasive here. I do think that Republicans have to they have a balancing act that they can't make this entire midterm election on fraud, but as a base turnout scheme, I think it does work.
I know Terry and Matt, you guys are both dads of a lot of kids, so you know, might make a lot of meals in your house, but 21,000 a day? I mean, like, how crazy is that? How does that not, like, jump off the page that there's fraud going on here?
You know, the sad thing is, I'm afraid it's the tip of the iceberg for the fraud that goes on with the trillions of dollars we spend on our government. So a little bit of oversight would go a long ways. But the good news for the Democrats, they can always just change the rules.
The founder of Feeding Our Future. Now, Bock spearheaded the scheme, which stole federal funds intended for children and was convicted of wire fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. Ilhan Omar's name first came up in an email chain with Bock back in February 2021. The subject line read, "Help with USDA food program," in a message to Omar's office. Now, about 2 weeks later, Bock emailed Omar's office with the subject line, "FNS approves Minnesota school PEBT plan." Then 1 day later, Bock exchanged messages with this Feeding Our Future employee who fled the country after he was indicted in 2022. The subject line of their emails was Ilhan's office. And the emails kept flowing after that. In March, Bock emailed Omar's office again about the state's school food program. There were also text messages between Bock and Omar's office, which was uncovered during a raid of Bock's Minnesota house. Now, while we know Omar's office was communicating with a now convicted fraudster, we don't know the contents of those messages or if Omar herself engaged in any wrongdoing. In a jailhouse interview with Fox, this is how Bock described those conversations.
Did you have any conversations with Ilhan Omar that make you kind of think twice now?
I've never actually spoken to her. I had spoken to members of her office. It was always really general, mostly pertaining to how the Department of Education was handling applications and the approval or denial of those. There was nothing of any substance pertaining to claims or meal counts or fraud or anything like that.
But Omar's ties to Feeding Our Future don't start and end with Aimee Bock. She also had close ties with one of the restaurants convicted of stealing $16 million, Safari Restaurant. Back in 2018, she celebrated her primary win at the very spot. And records show she spent nearly $10,000 in campaign funds there between 2018 and 2020. It's over $3,000 a year. The food must be so great to spend that much at a restaurant. And check this out. We unearthed this 2020 video of Ilhan Omar on Somali TV working inside Safari Restaurant. And while she speaks exclusively in Somalian, we were able to make out these words: pandemic, Meals Act, and Safari Restaurant. The chair of the Minnesota Fraud Committee also revealing Ilhan Omar received donations from several Feeding Our Future defendants. And that last name on the list right there, that's a former staffer for Omar who pled guilty to fraud. Here to react, Minnesota.
Republicans have repeatedly stated that you committed immigration fraud. Are you at all worried about a formal investigation that could perhaps lead to your deportation?
Well, you're one of those people.
I don't know what that means, but are you at all concerned?
Do I look concerned?
I guess not.
Okay.
All right. What about the Minnesota fraud hearing? You didn't show up for that. Do you think you should have?
Why should I have?
Well, it happened in your state. Don't you want to defend your position?
There were people from my state that were there.
Okay, but why not you? I mean, there's allegations that you're complicit in the fraud. Wouldn't you want to show up?
Why would there be an allegation that I'm complicit? How would I be complicit?
Well, what about Tim
Do
Walz?
you just ask stupid questions? Is this your thing?
I'm curious to get your thoughts.
No,
I mean, there's a lot of controversy around the issue. $9 billion in fraud in the state of Minnesota.
$9 billion.
You don't think so?
Really?
Yeah, and counting. Probably more, honestly. You think that's fake news or what?
That is more than half of the resources that are allocated.
Okay.
So you genuinely, like, your brain has told you that it is possible for half of the resources.
I'm just going off of what
for
the
our public service to, like, half disappear, is what you're saying.
countless Minnesota state representatives, whistleblowers have come
listen
forward.
to yourself, though.
I'm
Like,
trying
just think about that for a second.
Maybe if you showed up at the hearing, you would
Just-
know that
just think
whistleblowers
about
are
that
being
for a second.
retaliated against for exposing the fraud. Why is that? Why are they being
But
tracked and
just
traced?
think about what you're asking. Who is tracing whistleblowers?
Minnesota state officials, Tim Walz, anyone who dares to speak out against the government.
Tim Walz is doing something to
Yeah,
whistleblowers?
why is Tim Walz stepping down if he's, innocent? Why isn't he running for re-election?
Because he's had 8 years to serve as our great governor.
He was going to be vice president of the United States if Kamala
Yes,
won.
and he would have been an excellent vice president.
now he's stepping
much
down.
better than the person we have right now.
And now he's stepping down as governor. Any comment on that? You don't think he's maybe complicit?
He is focusing on trying to make sure our state remains great. All right, have a nice day.
Thank you, you too.
Did Congresswoman Ilhan Omar know anything about Minnesota massive $250 million fraud scandal during the COVID era? One convicted figure claims that Ilhan Omar knew about the fraud. Before jumping to conclusion, let's break it down. Exactly what is known, what is arranged, and what remains completely unproven. Watch these clips and then I'll come back with more comments.
Yesterday, they blocked a subpoena for materials from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Investigators want to see her communications with the convicted ringleader of the theft from $250 million in COVID funds, that particular part of the probe. That money was meant to feed hungry children. The subpoena attempt came after Ilhan Omar blew off a deadline to turn over the information. Republican candidate for Senate in Minnesota, Michelle Tafoya, with this.
She has not participated in this process at all so far. She has remained somewhat untouchable here in Minnesota. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure why we don't hold all of our suspected wrongdoers to account. There is so much smoke here, and I want to find the fire.
So for anyone unfamiliar, this revolves around the Feeding Our Future case in Minnesota. Federal prosecutors says the scheme involved fraudulent reimbursement tied to pandemic child nutrition programs. So the allegations from prosecutors was that tens or even ultimately hundreds of millions in taxpayer funds were improperly claimed through fake meal distribution operations. Multiple individuals have already faced charges or convictions in connection with the case. Now, one convicted figure reportedly claims Congresswoman Ilhan Omar knew about the fraud. Important disclaimer here, a claim from a convicted defendant is not evidence by itself. That distinction matters. What exactly is being claimed? According to reports, the allegations came during a jailhouse interview, but here is the big question. Was any actual evidence presented? Emails, meetings, documents, or even witness testimonies? Or is this simply an accusation with no substantiation? Because these are very different things. Let's think critically here. In major fraud investigations, public accusation often emerge after conviction. Sometimes they lead somewhere, sometimes they are attempts to reduce personal responsibility. This is why evidence matters more than headlines. If someone claims a public official knew about wrongdoing, the key question isn't whether the allegations sound dramatic, it is whether there is independent, verifiable proof. Without that, it remains exactly what it is, an allegation. I want your take, guys. Do you think high-profile accusations like these deserve immediate scrutiny? Or people should wait until evidence is publicly presented? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below and kindly remember to keep it respectful. So, to be clear, as of now, allegations are not findings, claims are not proof, and public figure like anyone else deserve fairness unless credible evidence establishes wrongdoings. But if verified facts emerge, that would obviously change the conversation. For now, the real story is the fraud case itself and the serious question it raises. If you want more breakdowns like this, kindly hit the subscribe button and join our family. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.